Have you ever replayed the same conversation 100 times, looking for the one sentence that would finally make it make sense? Have you ever told yourself, I just need one more explanation, and then somehow, even after you got it, the ache was still there? Here's something that might surprise you. Closure was never really the cure. The thing that actually heals you is distance, and most people never try it, because it feels like giving up. This isn't a slogan. It's psychology. And the person who explained it best was Carl Jung. Jung noticed something strange in his patients, the ones who finally got their answers. The apology, the explanation, the reason why, were often no calmer afterward than the ones who never got anything at all. That's a strange result if closure is really what heals people. So Jung asked a different question. What if the answer was never the missing piece? What if what people actually needed was space? This video is about that idea, not ignoring your pain, not pretending something didn't happen, just understanding why standing close to an unfinished story keeps you stuck inside it, and why stepping back, even without an explanation, is often the only thing that actually works. Let's start with the obvious question. Why does your mind want closure so badly in the first place? Your brain hates unfinished stories. This isn't a personality flaw, it's just how the brain works. An open question sits in your mind and demands attention, the same way a phone buzzing in your pocket demands attention, even when you're trying to focus on something else. Psychologists have a name for this. An unfinished task takes up more mental space than a finished one, even a small, unimportant task. Now imagine that task is one of the most painful things that ever happened to you. That's why you replay the conversation. That's why you draft messages you never send. That's why your mind keeps reaching for one more piece of information, hoping it will finally let the story rest. It isn't weakness. It's your brain doing exactly what brains do with anything left hanging. But here's the part that Jung understood better than almost anyone. Wanting to understand what happened and needing someone else to explain it to you are two completely different things. Understanding can come slowly, on your own, over time. But the need for someone else to explain it right now, that urgency, is usually not about understanding at all. It's anxiety, dressed up as curiosity. Notice the difference in how it feels. Curiosity can wait. It's calm, it's patient. Anxiety can't wait. It feels like an emergency, like you cannot function until the answer arrives. If what you're feeling is the second one, that's a clue. You're not actually looking for information. You're looking for relief, and you've convinced yourself that only one specific person can give it to you. Picture someone lying awake at midnight, drafting a text they'll never send, trying to find the exact wording that will finally get a real answer out of someone who's gone quiet. That's not research. That's the mind trying to make an emergency stop feeling like an emergency, using the only tool it knows how to reach for: more words, more contact, one more attempt. The next morning, the urgency usually feels a little smaller, not because anything got resolved, but because a full night passed without the world ending. That gap between how urgent it feels at midnight and how it feels by morning is worth paying attention to. It's often the clearest sign of which one you were actually dealing with. That belief is the trap, and it's the reason so many people get the exact conversation they were begging for and still don't feel better. So, why doesn't getting the answer actually work? Why does the relief fade so fast? Jung had a word for this. He called it a complex. Think of it less like a technical term and more like a bruise that never fully healed. When something painful happens, especially a loss, a betrayal, a sudden ending, your mind doesn't always process it right away. Sometimes it just stores the pain, still raw, still sensitive, waiting. That stored pain doesn't go away just because you finally got the conversation you thought you needed. Watch what actually happens after someone finally explains themselves. There's a moment of relief. And then often within days, a new question shows up to take the old one's place. Why did they wait so long to say it? Why does the explanation not feel like enough? Why do I still think about it? That's not bad luck. That's the bruise still there, just pointing at something new. The information changed. The underlying pain didn't. And that's the whole problem with chasing closure. You can get every fact, every apology, every explanation you ever wanted, and still feel exactly as stuck as before because facts were never actually what was keeping you stuck. This is the part most people never get told. You cannot talk your way out of a feeling that lives below the level of language. You cannot explain a bruise into healing faster. It heals the same way every bruise heals, slowly, quietly, and only if you stop pressing on it. Which brings us to the real question. If explanations don't work, what does? Here's how the trap usually plays out. Someone finally gets the conversation they'd been waiting months for. The other person explains themselves, maybe even apologizes. For a few hours, it feels like the weight has lifted. Then, a small detail from the conversation starts to bother them. A word choice that didn't sit right. A gap in the story that doesn't quite add up. Within a day or two, they're drafting a follow-up message, convinced that just one more conversation will finally close the gap the first one left open. This can repeat for months, each conversation promising to be the last one needed, each one leaving behind a new, smaller thread to pull. From the outside, it looks like someone chasing the truth. From the inside, it feels that way too. But notice what's actually happening. The size of the remaining question keeps shrinking, and the relief keeps arriving for shorter and shorter stretches. That pattern is the clearest sign that the problem was never really about missing information. If it were, the first real answer would have worked. Instead, each new answer buys a little piece and then hands the mind a new place to aim the same old ache. Every time you check their profile, every time you replay the conversation, every time you reach out again hoping this time will feel different, you're pressing on the bruise. You're not moving toward healing. You're keeping the wound fresh and then wondering why it hasn't closed yet. This is uncomfortable to hear because distance often feels like the wrong move. It feels like walking away from something unfinished, like admitting you'll never get what you deserve. But think about what you're actually protecting when you refuse to create space. You're protecting your access to the exact thing that's hurting you. You're staying close to a person or a memory that has already shown you it can't give you what you're asking for. Jung's own life gives a strange example of this. After a painful and very public falling out with Sigmund Freud, his mentor and closest colleague, Jung didn't spend years demanding an explanation or trying to repair things on Freud's terms. He pulled back. Completely. He went through a long, difficult period of working through it almost entirely alone. It wasn't easy. By his own account, it was one of the hardest stretches of his life, at times frightening enough that he worried about his own stability. He stopped writing to Freud. He stopped defending himself to the wider circle of colleagues who had taken sides. He simply let the professional relationship end without the closing conversation either of them might have once imagined having. But it was in that distance, not in any conversation with Freud, that Jung developed the ideas he's remembered for today, the very ideas this video has been describing. Here's the objection people usually raise at this point, and it's a fair one. Isn't distance just avoidance with a nicer name? Isn't refusing contact just another way of running from your feelings? The answer is no, but the two can look identical from the outside, so it's worth understanding the actual difference. Avoidance numbs. It fills the space with something else. A new relationship jumped into too fast. Constant busyness, distraction after distraction. Anything that keeps you from actually feeling what's underneath. Someone avoiding their pain through distance is still standing right next to it, just with their eyes shut. The bruise stays exactly as sore as it was, sometimes sorer, because nothing about it ever gets the chance to actually heal. Real distance does the opposite. It removes the things that keep reopening the wound, so what's underneath finally has room to surface. This is actually why real distance often feels worse before it feels better. Without the constant hit of checking or contacting, the feelings that all that checking had been helping you avoid tend to show up all at once. That's not a sign that distance is failing. it's usually a sign that it's finally working. So distance isn't about pretending it didn't matter. It isn't about bad-mouthing someone to convince yourself to stay away, which is really just anger doing the same job that longing used to do, still keeping you close to the story, just from a different angle. Real distance is quieter than either of those. It means you stop feeding the story anything new. No defending it, no attacking it, no checking on it. You just let it sit, the way a wound left alone finally gets the chance to close. This pattern doesn't only show up after breakups, even though that's usually the first place people recognize it. It shows up anywhere a story ends without a clean answer. Think about a friendship that just faded. No fight, no explanation, just slowly less contact until it stopped completely. That kind of ending is often harder to release than a loud one because there's nothing to point to, no single moment to make sense of. People spend years replaying small interactions, looking for the one where it started going wrong. The pull to reach out one more time, just to ask what happened, works exactly the same way it does after a breakup. It rarely brings the peace people expect because the friendship didn't end over a fact that's missing. It ended, and the missing fact is just where the mind decided to store the discomfort. Family estrangement follows the same pattern, usually with more guilt attached. A parent who won't acknowledge what happened. A sibling who tells a different version of the same event. Here, the pull toward closure often gets dressed up as responsibility, the idea that you owe it to the relationship to keep trying, keep explaining, keep hoping the next conversation will finally land differently. Sometimes that hope is fair. But when the same conversation has already happened 5 times with the same result, one more attempt isn't optimism. It's the bruise being pressed again, and calling it love doesn't change what it's actually doing to you. Even job loss and career endings follow this shape. Getting let go without a clear reason, or with a reason that doesn't fully make sense, can trigger the exact same loop. Replaying the last few weeks at that job, wondering what you could have done differently, waiting for a call that explains it properly. The mind treats an unexplained professional ending almost identically to an unexplained personal one, because the mechanism underneath isn't really about romance. It's about any story your mind couldn't finish on its own terms. Recognizing the pattern in these other places matters because it proves this isn't really about one relationship or one specific heartbreak. It's about how your mind handles anything left open. Once you can see the shape of it clearly, in a friendship, in a family, in a job, it becomes much easier to catch yourself doing it again the next time, instead of assuming this particular situation is somehow different. Let's make this practical, because understanding the idea and actually living it are 2 different things. The first step is the hardest and the most obvious. Stop the contact that keeps the wound open. This might mean muting an account, deleting a number, or simply deciding on purpose not to check for updates you don't actually need. This isn't punishment for them or for you. It's just removing the thing that keeps interrupting your healing before it can finish. If deleting a number feels too final, even changing how it's saved in your phone so a name doesn't flash up and pull you back in can make a real difference. The second step is expecting it to feel worse for a while. This trips people up more than anything else. They create distance, and instead of relief, they feel a wave of sadness or anger they hadn't felt in weeks. They assume this means the distance isn't working, so they reach back out. But that wave is usually the actual healing starting. All the feelings that constant contact had been letting you avoid are finally getting their turn. Let them come. They pass faster than you'd expect, especially if you don't interrupt them by reaching for your phone. A hard evening 3 days into distance doesn't mean you made a mistake. It usually means something real is finally moving. The third step is giving it real time, not a few days. A bruise doesn't heal in an afternoon, and neither does this. Most people give distance a week, feel a little better, and assume that means it's safe to check back in. That single check often resets the whole process because the mind treats it as new information, a new reason to start turning the story over again. If you're serious about healing, think in months, not days. Picture it less like flipping a switch and more like letting a cut stay covered long enough to actually close underneath. The fourth step is noticing your own progress instead of waiting for theirs. You're not going to get a signal from the other person telling you that you're allowed to feel better now. You have to notice it yourself. A day where you didn't think about it until the evening. A week where checking their profile didn't even cross your mind. Those small, quiet shifts are the actual proof that distance is working even without a single new fact ever arriving. Keeping a simple note, even just a line a week about how much space the story is taking up, can help you see progress that's easy to miss day to day. The fifth step, and maybe the most important one, is redirecting the energy you are spending on the story into something that has nothing to do with it. Not as a distraction, but as a way of showing your own mind that your life still has room to grow, even with an unanswered question sitting somewhere in the past. A new routine, a project you've been putting off, time with people who have nothing to do with the story at all. This doesn't erase what happened. It just makes room for something else to exist alongside it. Even once people understand all this, a few common mistakes tend to sneak back in and quietly undo the progress. The first is what's sometimes called half-distance. You stop texting, but you still watch their stories every day. You delete the number, but you still check mutual friends for updates. This feels like distance because the obvious contact has stopped, but the mind is still being fed just enough to keep the story open. If any part of you is still tracking their life in real time, the wound hasn't actually been left alone. It's just being watched from a slightly greater distance. The second is mistaking a good week for the finish line. Healing rarely moves in a straight line. You might go 10 days without thinking about it much, feel confident, and then get hit hard by something small, a song, a smell, an offhand comment from a friend. That doesn't mean you're back at the start. It means healing has its own uneven rhythm, and one hard day doesn't cancel out the real progress that came before it. The third is treating distance as something you owe an explanation for. People sometimes feel guilty going quiet, worried it looks cold or dramatic, but you don't need to announce your distance, defend it, or justify it to anyone, including the person you're creating it from. Distance works best when it's simply lived, quietly, without turning it into another conversation to have. Sometimes, full distance isn't possible. And that's worth addressing directly instead of pretending everyone has the option to disappear completely. Co-parents still have to coordinate. Co-workers still share a building. Family shows up at the same holidays whether you're ready or not. In these cases, distance has to be redefined, not as zero contact, but as contact stripped down to only what's actually necessary. This means keeping exchanges short and focused on logistics, not reopening the emotional story every time you're forced to speak. A co-worker doesn't need to hear how you've been feeling about everything that happened. A co-parent conversation can stay about the schedule without drifting into the relationship itself. This kind of limited contact still counts as real distance, because the part that was actually keeping the wound open, the emotional back and forth, the search for one more explanation, is the part being removed, even if some contact has to remain. Family gatherings deserve their own approach. Going in with a plan, deciding ahead of time how long you'll stay, who you'll spend most of your time near, and what topics you simply won't engage with, turns an unavoidable event into something survivable instead of another opportunity for the old story to reopen. You're not required to use every interaction as a chance to finally get through to someone. Politeness and distance can exist in the same room at the same time. Here's what tends to happen once real distance has had time to work. You'll notice you can think about what happened without your whole body reacting to it. You'll notice a song, a place, a memory that used to hit hard now just feels like a fact from your own history. You're not pretending it didn't matter anymore. You've simply stopped needing it to be resolved in order to feel okay. There's an objection that comes up almost every time this idea gets discussed, and it deserves a real answer instead of being brushed aside. It isn't fair. Why should the person who leave avoids accountability or explanation get to walk away clean while you're the one doing all the work to heal? Shouldn't they have to face what they did? That frustration is completely valid, and creating distance doesn't require you to decide that what happened was okay or that the other person deserves a pass. Those are separate questions. You can hold someone fully responsible for what they did and still recognize that your own healing cannot wait for them to accept that responsibility. Waiting for fairness before you allow yourself to heal means handing them control over your peace twice. Once, through whatever they did originally, and again through your own decision to stay stuck until they make it right. This isn't about excusing anyone, it's about recognizing a hard truth. Justice and healing don't always arrive on the same timeline, and sometimes they don't arrive together at all. Some people never apologize, some people never understand what they did. Waiting for that before you let yourself move forward means potentially waiting forever for something entirely outside your control. Distance doesn't require them to deserve your peace. It just requires you to stop needing their permission to have it. This is also what it actually means to become whole after something like this. Not that every question in your life gets answered, because most of them never will. It means you stop needing the answer in order to move forward, because you've built something inside yourself that doesn't depend on someone else's willingness to explain it. That's not a consolation prize. It's stronger than closure ever was, because closure depends on someone else showing up for you. This only depends on you. Setbacks are part of this process, not a sign that it's failing, and it helps to know that going in. You might go 3 weeks without thinking about it much, feel genuinely proud of how far you've come, and then get flattened by a memory that shows up out of nowhere, a smell, a specific street, an old photo a friend posts by accident. In that moment, it can feel like all the progress vanished overnight. It didn't. Healing doesn't move in a straight line, and one hard day doesn't erase 3 good weeks any more than one good day would have proven you were fully healed. The setback is uncomfortable, but it isn't evidence that distance stopped working. Often, it's the opposite. A memory that used to keep you spiraling for days now knocks the wind out of you for an afternoon and then passes. That's not failure. That's the same wound, just smaller and less powerful than it used to be. Be gentle with yourself on those days. This isn't a test you can fail by having a rough afternoon 3 months in. It's closer to physical recovery than people expect, uneven, occasionally frustrating, but moving in the right direction even when a single day doesn't feel like proof of it. The goal was never to reach a point where nothing ever touches you again. It's to reach a point where things that once knocked you flat for weeks now pass through in hours and eventually in minutes. Healing like this doesn't stay hidden forever, even though it starts as something completely internal. People around you tend to notice before you're ready to admit it yourself. A friend might comment that you seem lighter or that you haven't brought up the situation in weeks. Someone might mention that you laughed at something the way you used to before all of this started, easily, without the small delay that grief and obsession tend to add to everything. This external noticing can feel strange, even a little uncomfortable, especially if part of you still feels loyal to the pain, as if moving on too visibly means the situation mattered less than it did. It doesn't. Healing isn't a betrayal of how much something hurt. It's simply what happens when a wound is finally given the room it needed. Let people notice. You don't have to explain the process to them, the same way you didn't need to explain your distance to the person who caused the wound in the first place. Along the way, it helps to have something simple to say to yourself in the moments when the old pull shows up strongest, usually late at night or after a reminder catches you off guard. A short, honest line works better than a long argument with yourself. Something like, "I don't need an answer to be okay tonight." Or, "This feeling will be smaller tomorrow than it is right now." Or simply, "I'm allowed to leave this unfinished." These aren't magic phrases that erase the urge to reach out. They're a way of interrupting the automatic reach for your phone with something that gives the feeling a few extra minutes to pass on its own. Most urges, even strong ones, lose a significant amount of their pull within 20 minutes if nothing feeds them. A short phrase you actually believe, repeated during those 20 minutes, is often enough to get you to the other side of the urge without doing the thing you'd regret in the morning. Over time, you won't need the phrase as often. That's not because the situation resolved. It's because the part of you that used to panic at the first sign of an open question has finally learned, through repetition, that it's safe to let some things stay open. That lesson doesn't come from a single conversation, a perfect explanation, or a moment of closure arriving out of nowhere. It comes from exactly what this video has been describing from the start: space, given consistently, long enough for something old to finally finish on its own. One question comes up constantly: how long is this actually supposed to take? There's no single answer, because it depends on how long the story lasted, how deep it went, and how consistently the distance actually got held without interruption. But there are rough patterns worth knowing, so you're not measuring your own progress against nothing. The first few weeks are usually the hardest, because this is when the old habits are strongest. The urge to check, the urge to reach out, the urge to explain your side one more time. If you can get through the first month without breaking the distance, most people notice a real shift by week 6 or 8. Not full peace, but a clear sense that the story has started to lose its grip on the day. By the 3 or 4 month mark, many people find they can go entire days without the story crossing their mind at all, something that would have felt impossible at the start. This timeline isn't a promise, and it isn't a race. Some situations take longer, especially ones involving years of history or deep betrayal, and that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. What matters far more than hitting any particular week is whether the trend, looked at honestly over a full month rather than a single hard day, is moving in the right direction. If it is, the process is working, even on the days it doesn't feel like it. You spent a long time believing peace was waiting behind an explanation. It wasn't. It was waiting behind the space you kept refusing to give yourself, not as coldness, not as pretending, just as the one thing that actually lets a wound finish healing. Maybe you already know exactly which story this is for you. Maybe it's the ex who never explained why they left. Maybe it's the friend who stopped answering without a word. Maybe it's a parent who will probably never say the thing you've been waiting your whole life to hear. Whichever one it is, the invitation is the same. Not to force it closed with one more attempt, but to finally step back far enough that it can close on its own, in its own time, without needing anyone's permission but yours. That step back will feel strange at first, maybe even wrong, especially if you've spent months or years believing that staying close meant staying loyal, or that letting go without an answer meant the story didn't matter. It mattered. It's allowed to have mattered deeply and still be something you set down. Those two things were never actually in conflict, no matter how much they felt that way while you were standing too close to tell the difference. If this helped, don't reach for your phone to check if they've reached out. Sit with it instead. Tell me in the comments what story you've been standing too close to. The one you keep telling yourself needs one more explanation before you can finally set it down. And if you want more of this, the next video picks up right where this one leaves off. See you there.